You missed some important news from the LGBTQ plus community this week. To ensure you are current, we are recapping that important news. Here's what you may have missed. Hamburger Mary's files federal drag queen lawsuit against Florida and Governor Ron DeSantis. A popular Orlando restaurant that regularly features drag shows filed a federal lawsuit against the state of Florida and Governor Ron DeSantis yesterday, less than a week after he signed a bill that targets drag performances. The lawsuit, filed in Orlando federal court by the owner of Hamburger Mary's Orlando, claims the state is depriving the business of its First Amendment rights to free expression. The restaurant is asking the court to temporarily stop the law from taking effect while the case moves forward. Hamburger Mary's Bar and Grille has more than a dozen locations around the U.S., with the Orlando restaurant opening in 2008. According to the lawsuit, the restaurant had hosted family-friendly drag shows on Sundays, but the new Florida law is forcing them to ban children from all shows. This has led to a 20% drop in Sunday bookings. Proponents of the legislation have said the law is meant to keep children from viewing sexually explicit performances. Lawyers for the business argue the new law is so broad and vague that it could be applied to almost any performance that involves a man dressing up like a woman, even if the performance isn't sexual in nature. Now, we knew the show was going to drop. This is it. The breaking news of this is that this very likely, if the federal court will hear the case and then stay the law, which has better than 50-50 chance that they will stay the law, because it's an implementation of a new law, of a new interpretation of what drag is. We explained here at Queer News Tonight what great lengths that they went to try to pre-justify the constitutional arguments that they knew were going to come. Here they are. First Amendment free expression rights. At the minimum, I think we are very likely going to see the federal court, not in state courts, but in federal court, stay the new law while this moves forward in conversation. If that happens, the month of June for Florida improves significantly. We will watch this very, very closely.
I think a temporary injunction is more than likely, as you have said. And I think the problem here is that Florida has to define what is quote-unquote sexually explicit. A man in a dress inherently cannot be quote-unquote sexually explicit, because I can be in a nun's habit, so how can I be sexually explicit in any way? And a nun's habit is, of course, women's clothing. Now, the problem is that they need to skirt around that by naming it vaguely as sexually suggestive, so that, Moms for Liberty can file a complaint. This is not about us. This is about letting bigots basically squeeze through the back door to persecute the community.
Well, broad and vague are Casey and Ron's pet names for each other.
That's funny. That's funny. One final thought then is the argument in terms of the First Amendment free speech right is the natural argument against this law. The reason it's the natural argument against this law is they went so far to try to prevent free speech expression arguments against the passage of the law, which is why they made it very vague. Very likely, this is encouraging. This is really, really big news, because like what is going on in Tennessee in the process of going through, what happens if they have a temporary injunction and then the federal court rules against the state, it's going to be appealed. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and then anything is up for considerations. However, I think even the Supreme Court is going to be very hard pressed to define that someone in drag is sexually explicit, which is what Bobby's observation is, and it's going to be even more difficult to indicate that the free expression First Amendment rights are not at play here. The argument that has been made for the last 6 months in the issue of what we watched in the approaching issue over drag queens was the compare and contrast to Hooters girls. I love Hooters. We all love Hooters wings. We have nothing but respect and love for Hooters. However, you cannot bring an 8-year-old boy into Hooters and not say this is sexually explicit.
Absolutely.
The state's burden of proof will be to convince a federal judge and then the Supreme Court that there's a difference. They will not be able to do that, and therefore they are providing a separate but equal exclusion, which is the case point of the strike down of this law.
And I give a lot of credit to Hamburger Mary's and any other organization that's willing to take the bullet for everybody.
Yeah.
Because
That's what happens here.
yeah, they're standing up and they're making the first statement, and others will follow.
This story is a big, big story, especially for June Pride Month. Everyone will watch closely and report on it here at Queer News Tonight. Keep watching the only television news in the world from our LGBTQ plus community and stay informed on everything that is important for and about our diverse LGBTQ plus community.